I'll begin. Fantastic. We are now recorded. Excellent. I have people from the States, by the way, Yael, who'd like to have access to the recordings. So if you still have them, I will send them the link. Okay? All right, great. So I've got it. And what we're going to do is we're going to focus on the last, 14 chapters, more or less at the end of the third book of Moreh Nevukhim. So this is the end of the Moreh Nevukhim, more or less except for the dramatic chapters that we read before the break. And Rambam devotes these 14 chapters to the reasons for the mitzvot of the Torah. I stress the Torah because often we conflate Torah with Chazal. In other words, if Chazal give a reason for a mitzvah, we say, well, that's what the Torah meant. That's most of our education, I think. Rambam not only refutes that idea, but he makes one of the most strangest statements in the whole of the Moreh Nevukhim in what we are about to read. Good evening, Brian. Possibly this evening. Okay? Defensive and enigmatic. And that's something that's waiting for us. Okay? So if I have your attention, we will begin with these 14 sections. Now, Rambam liked the number 14.
Mm-hmm.
How do you know? What else has 14? Beside the reasons for the mitzvot at the end of the Guide for the Perplexed, what else did he write with 14?
The number of books and the Yad HaChazakah.
The Yad HaChazakah, his code of Jewish law, the Chibur, he took such pride in. The gematria of Yad is 14. Now, Jean, why did he call his book Yad HaChazakah? Not only because he divided it up into 14.
It's not he didn't use the word Yad HaChazakah.
No, but he divided the book up into 14 books. As I said, the Chibur. Now, the 14 books. Now, the people who attributed Yad HaChazakah cited the last pasuk in the Torah. What does the last pasuk in the Torah say? Asher asa Moshe le'enei kol Yisrael. So from Moshe to Moshe, ein keMoshe. So Yad HaChazakah is not only the 14, but it's the fact that the author, Moshe, he is like the Moshe of the Torah. What other work of Rambam has 14 sections? Composed early, finished in 1165.
Mishneh Torah?
In Fez. No, Mishneh Torah was 1188. The Sefer HaMitzvot, a book of commandments. Now, that has 14 principles as to how to define a mitzvah. Rambam was a great definer. But why did he like the number 14? A personal detail. What day was Rambam born on?
First day.
14.
The 14th of
Nisan,
which in 1135 corresponded to
Pesach.
the 30th of March. Okay, 14th of Nisan. So he liked 14, so he divides things up into 14. So, okay, that's a little bit of irrelevant stuff, but just very interesting. But of course, scholars get to work on the fact that Rambam wrote his Mishneh Torah Yad HaChazakah, divided it up into 14 books. And here we have 14 classes of mitzvot. And this is the entire sum of mitzvot in the Torah, 613. Are they the same or are they different? So we could spend a lot of time, and you would be falling asleep very quickly, on comparing and contrasting, but Rambam does some strange things. I'm going to throw out one example, and that's all. Brit Milah, circumcision. In which book of the Mishneh Torah do we read about Brit Milah? I'll tell you. Sefer Ahava. Ahava, of course, is not a a marriage counselor's guide. Sefer Ahava is how to love God. And of course, we love God by knowing him. So it's very intellectual, but it's the exercises we use to get closer to God. So the laws of prayer, blessings, readings, Sefer Torah, outward signs, tzitzit, tefillin, and Brit Milah. Because Brit Milah is again a way in which we're meant to imbibe something of the wisdom of the Torah, the path to perfection, and move up along it. So it helps us, okay? It's a guide to getting to know God. But in Moreh Nevukhim, if you were to read all the chapters, you'll see that it is found in the 14th class. What's the 14th class dealing with? Sex. And why sex is not such a marvelous thing. The Rambam puts Brit Milah in his Moreh Nevukhim into class 14 that says Milah is to dampen and put down the sexual drive. And we know what the Rambam thinks about the sexual drive, and Aristotle and that touching thing, the physical, the carnal, not his cup of tea, to put it mildly. By the way, it's interesting to note that in his Shmoneh Prakim, which is in the Siraj, commentary on the Mishnah that he wrote when he was in his early 20s, he's much more liberal, if you like. He says that the sex drive should always be according to the golden mean. Not too little, not too much, just trying to find the golden mean. As he grew older, his ascetic side, the side that was against bodily pleasures and benefits, I think becomes stronger and stronger. And the Moreh Nevukhim, written in 1191, okay, he passes away in 1204, represents an older man's view, which I guess can always be less understanding of those strong physical drives that characterize youth. As the book of Kohelet says, Uzachoret borecha bimei bachurotecha lifnei sheyagiu hashanim asher tomar bahem en li chefetz, which, of course, as you all know, reflects this type of transition. So anyhow, that's a little bit before we begin. And now I think I'm going to go into screen share. I'm going to ask people, I hope this is the one, yeah, to read, okay? Because I've done this in English, it'll save you listening to me the whole time. So who'd like to read? Okay, Shmuley, you've run away. So I'm asking you to read, please.
Maimonides devotes 14 chapters in the final part of part 3 of the guide to an analysis of all the mitzvot in the Torah in terms of their rational utility. There is a general form of rational utility and a specific one.
In other words, we can understand what the mitzvot are trying to do on purely rational grounds, and they are useful. So what is the general rational objects?
The general rational objects of the mitzvot are A, to teach two ideas about God and understanding of which is vital for those seeking perfection.
We know all this. In order to get close to God, you have to understand that the verses in the Torah about God need to be understood in a special way, and all of the stuff that we talked about earlier. Sophisticated, rational belief. Number B.
To fight all forms of idolatry and its irrational beliefs.
Remember the Rambam, for him idolatry isn't only about worshipping idols, it's about all irrationality, especially astrology, but anything and everything that is of an irrational nature. Okay, you've got to get rid of all of that irrationality if you're going to climb on the path of perfection to prophecy. Number C.
To help curb basic physical desires, food, drink, and sex, which seriously interfere with intellectual and spiritual progress.
Okay, so the third is quite clear. If you spend your time eating, drinking, and having sex, then you're not going to be able to have enough time and energy for the path to perfection. A prime example
of such a mitzvah is the law of the rebellious and seditious son, Ben Soreh Moreh.
Okay, so let's stop for a second. We know this law. We read it in the Torah. What happens if the charge against the Ben Sorer Umoreh, and of course we continue, because the Torah is klal uprat. Why is he a Ben Sorer Umoreh? How do you know? Torah says zolel v'soveh. He drinks too much, and it's alcohol. He eats too much. It's good steaks, and he is expensive, and he has no ability to control his appetites. Now he's still a nar, okay? But you can see he's going to become a person who has no self-control. Lack of self-control is manifested in excess eating and drinking, and therefore Rambam will say, in order to prevent him being a danger to himself and to others, he's taken to court, the charge is substantiated, he is executed, he's stoned to death. Now, what does the Gemara in the 8th parak of Sanhedrin, Ben Sorer Umoreh, what does it do with this din? Okay, how do the rabbis approach the Ben Sorer Umoreh? You can give me one famous line, or you can just tell me in general. In other words, do we learn?
How much disturbed?
Very good. Lo haya v'lo hoveh v'lo yihiyeh. This is a law that is actually never meant to be applied. The rabbis, Rabbi Yehuda in particular, has a midrash, and he interprets the law out of existence. Einenu shomea b'kolenu, says the Torah, and he doesn't listen to us. So what does Rabbi Yehuda say? He doesn't say kolotenu, it says kolenu. Mother and father have to speak with the same voice in terms of the decibels. Their voices must sound exactly the same from the physics point of view. And once he's on the similarity of voice, he plays with a kof and the kuf. He says, bekulanu. They have to be the same, mother and father, physically the same. Is that possible? Not possible. So the Gemara says, well, at the end of this discussion, if you've ruled the Ben Sorer Umoreh out of existence, then why did the Torah write the law at all? And what is the answer? Drosh v'kabel sachar. The rabbis say there are some laws that are meant to teach us drashot, but not be put into practice. Now, what drasha can you learn from the law of the Ben Sorer Umoreh and the fact that the Torah says, Einenu shomea b'koleinu, one voice? Very clear. Any psychologist will tell you. Mother and father speak in different voices. What chance does the child have of learning discipline? If the mother says you can't have the sweets or candies before bed after you've brushed your teeth, and the father says you certainly can because he spent the whole day in the office and feels guilty, then this child will not have a concept of discipline. So there is a dissonance between the text of the Torah, which seems to say somebody cannot control themselves, their carnal desires, you have to get rid of them, and what the rabbis do with this law. Where does Maimonides stand? Maimonides, I want to make this very clear, says that the Torah is to be taken literally, that the Torah is prepared to have the Ben Sorer Umoreh put to death in order to teach a lesson about needing to curb your basic physical desires. And he would therefore be drawing a line and separating between Talmudic interpretation and the Torah. Okay.
Although there is one opinion that's stated there that there was a Ben Sorer Umoreh and he sat on his caver or something like that.
Rabbi Yonatan. Okay. But the majority say never was. Rabbi Yonatan does the same thing with the Ir Hanidachat. Mm-hmm. So thank you for that. He does indeed say that it actually happened in the past. So what you can say may have happened once upon a time. By the time we get to the Gemara, the idea was unthinkable. And so it's a law, shelo haya, v'lo hoveh, v'lo yiyeh. But Rabbi Yonatan does indeed tell us, I stood on the grave and I stood on the remains of an Ir Hanidachat and also a Bayit Hamruga. Those three things that to the rabbis seemed not possible, and yet they're mentioned in the Torah, which is interesting. Okay, and we're going to delve into that deeply with the Rambam, hopefully this evening. Depends how fast Shmuel is reading.
To develop moral virtues which are necessary for the creation of a harmonious society. D. To develop moral and ethical virtues which are necessary for the creation of a harmonious society in which perfection may be pursued.
Okay.
In addition,
So the last thing you do, of course, is that when the Rambam says be nice to each other, he's not necessarily believing in being nice as a value, but unless we're nice, those of us who are on the path to perfection will be too distracted to move up to its heights. So we need a society that's friendly, generous, charming, and respectful in order to pursue our path to perfection. Okay. Maimonides also, that was read very well, Shmuley. Please stay with us. Aggie, I can see you. Would you like to give us, as a counterpoint to the Mancunian, a little Aussie?
Well, I can try. Okay, I'm working from my phone, so you'll have to be patient with me. Maimonides also makes the important point that although the mitzvot are designed to help a person achieve perfection, not everybody will do so, since they are aimed at the majority of people living under average conditions. He points out that this is an inherent defect in all legal systems, since law is inevitably general in nature. In this respect, law differs from medicine, which may be particularized for every individual in conformity with his present temperament.
And now we have a nice quote from a famous 19th century British physician,
who was Sir William Osler, and he said, "It's more important to know what kind of man has a disease than to know what kind of a disease a man has."
Now, this is not the case in relation to law. Now, what Rambam is doing is he's explaining to us, you know, we have this Torah, it's got rational utility. Every mitzvah is helping you to become a better person. But look, there are many bad people living in the community of mitzvah observers. Opgehitene Yidden are bad people, some of them. What went wrong? Rambam says, don't be surprised. Law is there to help improve people. But some people are going to fall out because they don't have the average psychological makeup, genetic disposition, talents, will. Some people are just going to be evil. It's not because the Torah doesn't work. If you keep to the program, you keep to the mitzvot, and then Rambam adds something, and you understand what the internal motivation for the mitzvot is. You've read my book and you know that milah is there, not as some Kabbalistic thing, but it is to make you dampen your sexual drive, then you'll become a better person. But not everybody will do that. And he adds a very barbed point, and he talks about the fact that the worst sin is hypocrisy. Those people who pretend to be observant of the law, but inside themselves, their hearts are black with sin. It's like a famous pasuk in Yeshayahu that we read about Hamitkadshim v'hamitarin. John, are you here?
Yes.
So you remember Hamitkadshim v'hamitarin, but inside exactly Haftarah of Shabbat Rosh Chodesh, but inside they're eating hasheketz, okay, the haremes, okay. So inside their homes, they're corrupt, and inside themselves. So what Rambam says is that this is the difference between law and medicine. When it comes to law, you can only speak in general terms. You're going to lose people when it comes to. I have a voice on my left. Will that voice make itself louder?
There's a concept of rough justice because it has to be for everyone.
I hear from my left there's a concept of rough justice because law can only be average. And that impacts upon the criminal law and upon sanctions, punishments as well, whereas medicine can be individual, and Rambam had the advantage of being both a great jurist and a great physician. Okay, thank you, Aggie. That was excellent. Jeff, you're next. Unmute, please. We're staying in the Antipodes. 2, Maimonides.
Maimonides divides the mitzvot of the Torah into 14 classes for purposes of their rational analysis. 1, fundamental opinions, namely basic beliefs and the principle of teshuvah.
Okay, basic beliefs we've talked about at great length. And he adds teshuvah because this means there's always hope. Never give up hope. Always believe that you can do better. Number 2.
2, prohibition on idolatry, focusing on Sabian fertility rites, magic, and astrology. The prohibitions on witchcraft, grafting, mixing species in agriculture and animal husbandry, cutting peot and destroying beards, shatnez, cross-dressing, molech, asherah, olah, meat and milk, and the link with the festivals, darkei and the exclusion of tried cures from that prohibition.
Okay, so what I'm doing is I'm giving you a potted version of all of these chapters, and we'll stop at 1, which we'll read again because it's very interesting. But Rambam has a thing with idolatry. We've talked about this a lot. It's not worshipping idols. It's anything that's irrational. And that irrationality is mixed with has a strong sexual overtone. So the Rambam's sources, of course, for idolatry were the Sabian book of agriculture and the book of Tumtum or Tom, all sorts of books which he said he studied at great length. So, and he has a thing for astrology, which again makes him exceptional because most of the famous rabbis in the Middle Ages believed in astrology. Rambam was an absolute rationalist to the core. And he talks about the fact that the book of agriculture, the Nabatean book of agriculture, was a recipe for a successful life. Why? In an agrarian society, if your crops failed, and this is true of the entire medieval period, if your crops failed, you died. Simple as that. Starvation, hunger, you died. So you needed to have a good crop, okay? How did you have a good crop? Well, the Sabians, which is a name for all idolaters, he clumps them all together because he never knew any real idolaters, okay? They all base themselves on trying to get the gods to give them rain, hail, sun, whatever is necessary for a good crop. In a way, we are very similar. We want to assure ourselves of economic success. We'll do anything we think that'll work, okay? Without necessarily exploring its rationality, which is why many of us lose a lot of money as well as making a lot of money. Okay, now, all of these ceremonies, these efforts to get the gods on your side, to get nature to cooperate, they involved, as I said, they had a sexual overtone as well. Rambam says that the laws of the Torah fight these practices across the board. And many of the dinim in the Torah, the laws of the Torah, are there to fight this type of irrational practice that aims to ensure successful agriculture. Therefore, the Torah says in Shema, Vayam Shema Tishua El Mitzvotai. If you listen to my commandments and you don't go after these practices and you are rational and you are on the correct path, then I will give your rain, v'natati, matar b'artzechem, and you'll have yoreh u'malkosh. In other words, as we say in French, punct fakert. If you do not worship idols, if you do not do all of these rites and magic, then you will succeed and God will bless your crops. The Torah and Tanakh are full of the promise of successful agriculture and animal husbandry if only you keep my commandments, because everywhere else in the world in which the Torah was given, they were doing the exact opposite, worshipping idols in order to get rain, sun, dew, hail, whatever they needed at the right time. So let's go through a couple of these things, okay? Prohibitions on witchcraft. Witches involve women, and there's a sexual aspect here, grafting. Let me read to you from the Sabian Book of Agriculture. When a tree is grafted into another in the time of a certain conjunction of sun and moon, astrology, okay, you graft, and is fumigated with certain substances, whilst the formula is uttered, that tree will produce a thing that will be found exceedingly useful. Okay, now the ceremony of grafting an olive branch upon a citron tree is described in the book of Nabatean Agriculture. And now listen, when one species is grafted upon another, the branch which is to be grafted must be in the hand of a beautiful damsel, whilst a male person has disgraceful and unnatural sexual intercourse with her. During that intercourse, the woman grafts the branch into the tree. Now, I'm not going to try and fathom how that happens, but this is what Rambam finds in the book of Nabatean Agriculture. Whatever, okay? There's no doubt that this ceremony was general and that nobody refused to perform it, especially as the pleasure of love was added to the supposed future result of the grafting. The Torah, therefore, prohibits us to mix different species together, i.e., to graft one tree into another, because we must keep away from the opinion of idolaters and the abominations of their unnatural sexual intercourse. In order to guard against the grafting of trees, we're forbidden to sow any two kinds of seeds together or near each other. That puts the whole issue of kilaim, shatnez, harkava in a different light altogether. So we don't mix, because the mixing was the way the idolaters wanted to get the forces of nature together, the wine and the wheat, and there was the sexual aspect too, and that's how they thought they would assure success. Cutting peyot and destroying beards, the priests or the those people who performed these particular ceremonies guaranteed in their minds to make you rich and wealthy and successful, they would cut their peyot and destroy their beards. So we don't want to do what they did. Shatnez is the mixing of two wools, the wool from an animal and the linen from a tree, from a plant. So this is again the combinations. Mix them together. There's a sexual aspect of bringing the male and the female, and that's how we assure success when you do it at the right time. The times of the zodiac, okay, when you have the moon in the seventh house, whatever it is. Cross-dressing. Interesting, the Rambam again cites from another book called Tumtum or Tom Tom, famous in medieval Islam, written by an Indian, translated into Arabic. And what did this say? It says that when Venus is in the ascent, a man dresses up as a woman and says prayers. And when Mars is in the ascent, a woman dresses up as a man and says prayers. And if the right prayers are said at the right time, then there'll be agricultural success. Molech doesn't mean burning the babies, passing them over the fire. Now, the priests and the adepts, would come to a mother with a newly born child and say, do you want your child to thrive? It has to be passed over the fire. Then Molech will look after it and have a healthy baby. Which mother would not, says the Rambam, accept such? We just want to give our kids the best possible chance for the future. This is irrational. Don't do it. This is what the Torah fights. Therefore, it really castigates Molech. It doesn't want you to be irrational, even if you think your children's welfare is at stake. And this is a serious issue, very serious, and for us as well. Orla, the Sabians would eat their fruit in the first 3 years and not eat it in the fourth. We do the opposite. Again, Adarabba or Punt Fakert. Meat and milk. is also a very interesting one because you mix two different kinds, okay? And the meat and the milk and the mixing of the meat and the milk is also found in our Torah in connection with the Chagim. Lo tava shel gidi b'chalevimo occurs on all the kriyot, all the laning of the shalosh regalim, because in the temples, when they went on the festivals, the mixing of the meat and the milk was a mixing of two kinds, and mixing of two kinds was a good thing in the Sabian world, Rambam's artificial world that he projects onto idolatry as a whole. But you can see a theme here, and I have to say it's a fairly convincing one, because mixtures clearly are abhorrent to the Torah. And Darchei Ha'emori, in general, Rambam says all of these things. He throws, by the way, kaparot into this class as well, very opposed to kaporos. He wouldn't look kindly on tashlich, it's not even mentioned, okay? All of these things, and exclusion of tried cures. But if it works, then you can have some flexibility. Improvement of moral qualities. Jeff, you're doing well. Let's have you read number 3.
These are the 11 mitzvot in Hilchot Deot, 5 aseh and 6 lo taseh, beginning with imitatio Dei.
Imitatio Dei, you shall copy God, okay?
And going on to Avat HaRe'ah, Avat HaGer, Tochacha, including the Isur of Halbanat Panim.
Tochacha, if you're going to tell somebody off, you have to, but you mustn't put them to shame. Then
Not to hate, slander, take revenge, bear a grudge, and not to oppress the weak and powerless. Kol almana v'yatom lo ta'anun. The reason for these is to bring about a harmonious and conflict-free society in which perfection is possible.
So as I said before, don't conflate Rambam with virtue ethics as such. It is all the path to perfection. Inculcating generosity. We'll stay in the Antipodes. Debbie, would you like to read, please? Class 4.
Class 4.
Top of page 2.
Okay.
Loudly and clearly.
Inculcating generosity.
Can you all hear?
Yeah.
Good.
Inculcating generosity and the subjugation of the acquisitive drive. Arachim.
Arachim is when you say, my value should go to the temple.
Haramim.
Haramim is when you say, Cherem alai, my favorite cow. In other words, it's going to be holy and sacred, and I will not use it anymore.
Trumot.
Trumot, we know that's the tithe given to the Kohanim.
Ma'asrot.
Ma'asrot are the tithes given to the Levi and to the poor.
Ma'aser Sheni.
That's taken up to Jerusalem and spent there, so that the shopkeepers and merchants of Jerusalem will have a livelihood.
Netarevai.
That which you have to do in the 4th year, take it up to Jerusalem once again.
Chala.
Chala, you give it to the Kohanim who don't have any land.
Bikurim.
The first fruit goes to the Kohanim.
Reshit Hagev.
Goes to the Kohanim. The first of your shearing. Very good for an Australian. The first of the sheep shearing. Zeroah. The forearm of the animal.
L'chayai.
The cheeks of the animal.
Keva.
The stomach.
Bechorot.
The firstborn of the animals that are, again, value given to the temple.
Shemitah.
Shemitah, we know what that is. Yovel.
Malveh v'loveh. And Avadim.
In this case, the class number 4 is more or less identical to Sefer Zra'im, one of the books in the 14. Okay, Maimonides observes
that one ought not to be generous to the cruel as the Bedouins do in the context of their extreme hospitality ethic.
Now, we will touch a little upon Maimonides' digs at Islam. He often criticizes. And in this particular case, he criticizes the hospitality idea in which bad people are given hospitality, okay, will not be released to their condign punishment, and that's a bad thing. So in other words, be kind, be generous, do not dampen your acquisitive drive, but don't do it so that you help bad people. So he would not be happy with you, say, perhaps, I don't know, giving charity to somebody who's going to use it both to use drugs and peddle drugs. He'd say you have to investigate where your charity goes. And he does so in his Hilchot Tzedakah, okay, the last 8 sections. So that's as much as I'm going to say about that, because I want to get on to our star passage this evening. So, Debbie, would you like to read another one, please?
Imposing a duty of care in relation to one's person and property, tort law. He also explains the release of the inadvertent killer from exile at the death of the Kohen Gadol.
Now, why did the Torah say that when somebody killed inadvertently, b'shogeg, they have to go into exile galut? When the Kohen Gadol dies, they can leave galut and return home. Why? Anybody want to suggest a reason? Well, Rambam says because it's a time of national mourning. Everybody's in mourning, so they'll be less concerned with the death of their relative who was somewhat pale into insignificance, and therefore it's a good time to release. And the next one, please.
The reason for the ceremony of the Eglah Arufah.
The beheaded heifer. Now, when do we behead a heifer?
On Yom Kippur.
Not on Yom Kippur,
Right.
no.
And
Not
we
on-
find
Someone
it-
dies and then
that-
no one knows who killed him.
and
Somebody
Right.
does. Somebody says we found a corpse. The corpse has been murdered. We can't find the murderer. What do? The elders of the city bring down a heifer, as is a young calf, and they break its neck. And there's a ceremony, and they say we were responsible for this bloodshed. And the place where the heifer was decapitated can never be used as pasture or never be used as a field.
Wasn't used before either.
Shelo ubadba. Okay, fine. And the heifer was not used either, but it will never be able to be used in the future. So there's a loss of potential profit here, in terms both of a heifer, and which came from the area where the corpse was found, and the land. Why this ceremony? What does Rambam say? He says, it is
Hospitality.
for. Sorry, does somebody want to say?
Because the hospitality, the towns never looked after the stranger, who presumably was the halal.
Yeah, Marcel, that's a great message that Chazal give us. But why do we break the neck of a heifer and say you can't use the land? You've given us the Musa, which is perfect. Perfect example of what we are going to be getting at shortly. That's how we see it. That's why it's important for us. But that's only the moral message that we derive. Look at the actual law itself. Behead the heifer, never use the land. What's going on? Rambam says it's detective work. He says we cannot find the murderer. We've tried hard. So what do? We have to get people involved. So what we do is we do this bizarre ceremony. The elders of the city come. With them will come the TV and the reporters and the newspapers, and it'll become a matter of local interest. Everybody will know. Somebody may step forward and say, well, I remember, and will identify the criminal. The person who's chiefly going to want to find the murderer and prevent the ceremony taking place is, of course, the owner of the land and the in which the heifer is taken. And he's going to do his best to make sure that his land is not going to be made land that can never be touched. So this is how the Rambam goes about giving rational reasons, useful reasons for all of these mitzvot. Brian, could you read number 6, please? Brian?
Yeah, I'm just trying to get the phone to switch.
It's all this phone stuff. If it's hard, we'll get someone else.
Yeah, it's not behaving.
Okay. So Stanley, would you like to read?
What would you like me to read? Starting
6,
with,
please, on page 2.
All right.
B1. Crimes and their punishments.
Crimes and their punishments. According to Maimonides, the principle underlying criminal punishment in the Torah is a life for a life and an eye for an eye in relation to homicide and destruction of body parts, respectively.
If
The rabbis,
you destroy my eye, you lose yours. If you take off my leg, you lose yours. Same for a hand, okay? The rabbis, however,
substituted monetary compensation in the case of limb destruction. This prompted Maimonides to make one of his most enigmatic and controversial statements in the entire guide.
so I will now read, and we'll read what he has to say here. המצוות אשר כלל אותם הכלל השישי, הם לקחת הדין מן החוטא. Rambam is a firm believer in punishment. Okay, he says if you commit a crime, you must be punished. ותועלתם בכלל ידועה וכבר זכרנוה. And we know why we need to punish criminals, okay? We have to prevent their crimes and deter other people from committing similar offenses. ואומנם פרטיהם בדין כל חלק שבא בהם שמע אותם. But I want you to listen carefully to how we go about punishing criminals. שם עונש כל חוטא לזולתו בכלל שיעשה בו כמו שיעשה בשווה. It has to be on the basis of tit for tat, quid pro quo, or as we say in Roman law, lex talionis. We do the same to you as what you did. Im hizik beguf yinazek begufo. Bodily crimes, there's a bodily punishment. Im hizik b'mamon yinazek b'mamono. If you cause somebody financial loss, you must suffer financial loss. When it comes to money, you can be nice and you can be forgiving. But if you kill someone, you may not take ransom when there's been a murder, which of course is the case in Islamic law. Under Muslim law, if the relatives of the victim decide that they want to settle for a sum of money, there was a case involving 2 Australian nurses, I think, in which the family eventually in Saudi Arabia agreed to take a ransom and not put the Australian nurse to death, okay? Torah says Rambam is absolutely opposed to that. The earth will never be atoned for unless we spill the blood of the one who spilt blood. Now, the other expression that we use is velo tachanifu et haaretz. Now, the word chanaf is to flatter. What has flattering got to do with not punishing somebody for their crime? Well, the earth, if it does give its produce and blood has been spilt, is in fact not being sincere. It shouldn't. So it's flattering. It is actually doing something externally which doesn't reflect the internal truth. The earth is meant to reject murder. The blood, as we read in the case of Cain and Abel, your brother's blood cries out to me from the earth. So the earth is flattering, is a chonef, when no justice is done by putting the murderer to death. If somebody who's been attacked and is mortally wounded, but lives a day or two and says, and he's competent, Rambam says, Sichro Tov, he's competent, and he says, do not kill him, I've forgiven him, okay? En shomim lo, we do not listen. Aval nefesh benefesh behechreach, bashvat hakaton lagadol, it's whether there's a minor or an adult, a slave or a free person, or a fool or a wise man. The greatest sin is homicide, killing someone, and I could talk a lot about that, but I shan't. One who causes somebody the loss of a limb shall himself lose a limb. As it says, very clear. Now the Rambam says this explosive statement. Please look. V'lo tatrid rayoncha v'yotenu onshim kan b'mamon, and do not be disturbed by the fact that the rabbi is saying that if you knock out someone's eye, you will not lose your eye, but you'll pay compensation. My intention, says the Rambam, is to provide a reason for the psukim of the Torah, and not to explain the words of the Talmud. They're different things. Now I have something to say about the Talmud. Dat yishma panim panim. Something that I will say face to face.
With who?
With who is the question? With whom? But first of all, let's have a look at Chazal. Ibn Ezra cites Rasagra Sadia, explains why we don't apply an eye for an eye. We, the rabbis in our Torah Shabbat Peh, say we cannot possibly apply the principle of an eye for an eye. Say you smash someone's eye and they've lost a third of their sight. How can you deal a blow to the striker's eye that will result exactly in the loss of a third and not more or less?
A bit like Shylock's.
Exactly.
Pound
Which
of
Shakespeare play does that remind us of?
Shylock.
Merchant of Venice.
Merchant of Venice. Daniel has come to judgment. Portia, okay? That's her argument to defeat Shylock in court. The pound of flesh, not a little more, not a drop of blood, only a pound of flesh. She got it from the Torah. Ilu yachshich, or the rabbis, ilu yachshich or eino kulo. V'yoter kashe ha'kviya v'apetza v'chabura. How about these wounds and burns? Im hayu b'makom musukan ulai yamut, depends where they are. En hadat sovelet. Amar lo ben Zuta. Now, Rabbi Sadi Gaon had a Karaite opponent who's called Ben Zuta, which is actually a play on words, because Zuta means small. The Karaite says, no, it's a life for a life, burn for a burn, wound for a wound, eye for an eye, hand for a hand, foot for a foot, just like the Torah says. So Ben Zuta says, V'alo katuv b'makom acher, kashi yiten mum ba'adam ken yinaten bo, the same pasuk as the Rambam cited. The Gaon Shivlo, so Rasak says to him, Yeshanu bet tachat al. Sometimes we say bet, okay, but it means al, okay. So hine tamoki naten alav onesh ken naten bo. The bet doesn't mean in him; it means in relation to him. So he has to pay money, okay. Ben Zuta heshivlo kasher asa ken yaselo. But there's a principle. Lex talionis. Like Gaon Eshiv, Hine Shimshon Amar, Kasher Asuli, Ken Asita Lahem, the Philistines. Okay, as they did to me, they took away my wife. I will do to them, Shimshon, Lo lakach neshotehem, unatanam lacherim. But he didn't do that to the Philistines, Rak. Gemolam Heshiv Lahem. But he did punish them in a different way. He killed quite a few of them. Uben Zuta Heshiv, Imaya Makeh Ani, Maya Onsho. But how can you get a punishment if the striker is poor? He doesn't have any money. Hagone Shifra Rasag says, Im Iver, Yaver ein Pikeach Bayaselo. What happens if the one who took out the eye is himself blind? Then you can't do, and you can't punish him according to your way. Okay? Rasag is clever. A poor person can perhaps get rich and be able to pay the compensation. But a blind person will never be able to regain his sight, at least not in the Middle Ages, okay? So that is a fairly knockout argument. We cannot explain the Torah's words in a way that's satisfactory. Unless we use Chazal. There's no difference between Torah shebichtav and Torah shebal peh. But the Rambam seems to be saying there is, because he says that when I explain the punishment for maiming someone, that is destroying a limb, I'm giving you the reason that the Torah gives. And this is what the Torah wants, presumably. The rabbis of the Talmud say something else. And I'm not explaining the rabbis of the Talmud, I'm explaining the Torah. Whereas Rasad is with Marcel, and he says something that we all are brought up with, that the rabbis explain the psukim of the Torah, and the psukim of the Torah intend to the rabbi's interpretation. Now, this statement of Rambam was absolutely shocking. So we're going to read Shem Tov, okay? A Rabbi Shem Tov Ibn Yosef. Don't know too much about him, except that he wrote a commentary on the Moreh Nevukhim, which is probably the main and prime commentary, okay? He was a great admirer of the Rambam, a great rationalist, and he has the following to say. Amar Shem Tov, leda'ati, ma shekiven harab omro tishma'enu panim b'fanim. The Rambam said, I have a way of explaining the Talmud and its relationship with the Torah, but I'm only going to say it face to face. If shalasigo al derech ha'emet, ela al tzad hanuvuah. So Shem Tov's first interpretation is, Rambam means have to be a prophet to understand that, and a regular person never will. Well, okay. Ve'efshar gam ken she'omar al tzad ha'omed. Now Shem Tov says, well, look, we could do it like this. Approximation. If somebody maims somebody with intention and with an evil attitude, then we will indeed take out the offending limb from the attacker. Somebody did it inadvertently or in a moment of anger, okay? En ra'ui la'asot lo kasher asa v'yanesh b'mamon. So Shem Tov says perhaps there is a distinction to be made. Perhaps the Torah means to say that in certain circumstances you will take an eye for an eye when the attacker was an evil person who meant to destroy the other person's eye. There is a view in the Gemara, by the way. Rabbi Eliezer says ayin takat ayin mamash. Then the Gemara changes the interpretation and says it's ba'ayin shel hamazik. So it's the payment is in a different direction, not the nizok, but the mazik. But this is not part of the Torah Sheba'al Peh, and we don't find this anywhere at all in rabbinic literature. There's a distinction between ayin takat ayin and monetary compensation, depending upon the intention of the attacker. Afilu tachlit hapele ממאמר הרב שאמר כי כוונתנו הייתה לתת סיבת הפסוקים ולא סיבה מה שנאמר בתלמוד. But the most egregious offense committed by the Rambam is that he says that the psukim and the Talmud are different. כי הפסוקים אינם אמיתיים, לא בכל ולא בחלק, אלא we believe that the true interpretation of every pasuk in the Torah is according to the Kabbalah shekiblu rabotenu, the way our rabbis have interpreted it. Uchemo ma shepirshu rabotenu batalmud. The Gemara teaches us what the Chumash means clearly. At least that's what I learned, okay? But Maimonides doesn't say so. וזה הרב למדנו שאם מלך המשיח יבוא ויאמר שפירוש הכתוב כפי פשוטו עין תחת עין ממש חייב מיתה. למה? שהוא סותר את התלמוד. And didn't the Rambam himself teach us that even if the king Mashiach were to come along and say the pasuk עין תחת עין is literal, he's liable, the death sentence will execute Mashiach because he's contradicting the Talmud. Do you think the Rambam ever said that?
No.
I have one no. Do I have any more no's?
No.
No, good. There's nowhere in the Rambam where he says anything like that. There's nowhere in Chazal nowhere in the Talmud or the Midrash. I mean, we're not going to excuse the Mashiach, for goodness sake, okay? Because he could. Where Shem Tov Ben Yosef got this from, nobody knows. People who've been studying the Rambam for decades do not know. We simply do not know where this came from. It's an invented sentence or line, but it's there to point up the shock that Shem Tov got when he read this line in the Moreh Nevukhim. Okay? And he's still respectful, our rabbi and our teacher. He was a great admirer of Maimonides, a rationalist. But this is something he simply could not take. So I don't know where the Rambam got this from. Ki lo kach lamadnu. This isn't what we've learned. Hashem yichaper ba'ado u'va'adenu. May the Lord atone for him and for us. So this was my time bomb, okay, for this evening. What is going on here? Okay. We have to think about this carefully. So the one thing I'm going to do in the time we have left, we have 4 minutes. Rambam says I would explain this, but only to somebody face to face. Okay? A likely candidate for the somebody would be his son, Rabbi Avraham ben Rambam. Okay? Now, it wouldn't have been Shmuel ibn Tibbon, because what did the Rambam say to Shmuel ibn Tibbon, or write to him, when Shmuel ibn Tibbon, the translator of the Moreh Nevukhim, wanted to come to Egypt and speak to him and discuss the text?
You see, he said he would have no time for him.
He said, don't come, I wouldn't have any time. You know, I mean, really, the Rambam goes off into this almost tirade, how I have to go to the Wazir al-Fadel's palace. I only get back and I'm exhausted and I'm famished and I'm faint and I lie on my bed, and advice any time I have for teaching Torah is Shabbat. But look, if he wanted to find a bit of time, I'm sure he could. He did write to Ibn Tibbon explaining certain passages, and others he simply didn't. Because as I said, the Rambam, certain things he was not prepared to say. But rarely does he actually write, I'm not prepared to tell you unless you come and see me face to face, knowing full well that nobody will. So this is what his son says in the commentary published or translated from Arabic by the late Rabbi Dr. Ephraim Wiesenberg from Northwest London, okay? And that famous edition of the Avraham ben Harambam's Perush on the Torah. Ein tachat ein. Pashta dikra muvua. It's very clear what it means, an eye for an eye. Aval bi'ara Torah sheba peh shekavanat hamikra demei shen tachat shen. The Torah sheba peh says the price or compensation in money for a tooth, an eye for an eye. V'yesh sa'ad davar hazeh beidut hamikra uvarayot ha'ekesh ktavam rasag beferusho. And as Rasag just showed us, there are ways of proving that this is making a fairly strong case that we would interpret Ein Tachat Ein as man. V'hu amro yitaleh, rak shifto yiten v'rapo yirapeh. Torah also says if somebody injures somebody, says a makah, not necessarily causing them to lose a limb, then you pay shevet and ripui and boshet and nezek, all the things we've learned in Bavakam. Okay. But that is, again, in the Torah only for a wound and not for losing a limb. Ula Abba Marizal b'Moreh, and my father, blessed memory in his Moreh, Ramaz Bazeh, he hinted, Shenimsar mimenu perusho al piv bo hachra nifla'a ben hakabala upshat ha-nikra, that he has a wonderful way of reconciling the Torah and its pshat, and Torah Shabbat Peh, but I can't write it, nobody can, because he hid it. And Kapach, who's the great Yemenite translator of the Moreh Nevukhim, just says Daled, and this is where we will end before we get to the interesting bit. Many commentators have tried to suggest a resolution for the Rambam's words. They're all guesses. So stop share That's our shiur for this evening. And if anybody would like to make a comment or a question, now is the time.
I have one question. When we talk about chutnez,
Yeah,
we have the prohibition of mixing wool with linen.
yeah.
And there are several reasons which we went into, etc. My question is, why is it limited to wool and linen? And why does it, for instance, not include silk and something else?
Okay, I think the answer is again very simple and very rational. Silk wasn't readily available, whereas wool was readily available because in the agrarian society, you have sheep, goats, everybody has them, and the linen, the pishtan, was grown. So you had a constant supply of wool and linen, and then you could use it for these magical practices, irrational practices, to mix the two with a woman involved, and you'd have a way of guaranteeing a good crop, okay? Whereas polyester hadn't been invented. Silk was very rare. And as I said, life was much simpler then. So we take that as an example. And of course, it is cited in the book of Nabatean Agriculture, this book from which Rambam derived his knowledge of what he calls avodah zara. And the same thing, by the way, goes for a lot of Ashel Gedi Bachalevimo. The Gedi, everybody had goats. They had basic crops, and they had goats, and they had sheep. So you went to the idolatrous shrine. On a festival, you brought your kid, literally a small goat. You did boil it in its mother's milk. And this was a way you wanted to control and improve your crops and your animal husbandry. So everything the Rambam more or less relates to what was going on in the times of the Tanakh as far as he could understand.
Silk was traded even in the days of Joseph, when the caravans traded in silk.
There was silk, but it wasn't available to most people. Okay, it was always a rich man's, and Yosef's Ktonet was also a rare. Okay, so spices. Remember spices too. The caravan of Ishmaelim carrying nochot, v'tsari, valot down to Egypt. These spices were not given to everybody. Think about medieval Europe. Only the rich were able to spice up their meat and to enjoy pepper and this and that till it reached the tables of the common man or woman. Took a long time.
The other question is, if it is forbidden to graft plants, why is it allowed to eat a product of this graft? If, for instance, like nectarines or whatever.
Rambam is very simple. If you weren't involved in that practice of actually doing the grafting, then it doesn't matter. The problem is that the grafting itself is the irrational and sexually perverse, act. That's what we don't want to do. But if it happens to come your way, it's a bit like when he talks about darkei ha'emori, he says, but if it is of medical value, if it's proven, then darkei ha'emori does not apply, which is very important, actually, because there is, I'm sure, the doctors amongst us. Where's Jeff? Jeff, come back into the picture, okay?
Yep.
Say there's something that's not irrational, medical. It just doesn't pass. But a patient does feel better every time they do something. What would you as a doctor say? Stop it or go ahead?
If it does no harm, then keep on doing it.
Okay. Primum non nocere. Right, Jack? First thing, do no harm. If it doesn't do any harm, if the nectarine is nice, then you can eat it. But the problem is when you get to that bit which is actually immoral and also makes you into an irrational person. By the way, Rambam is not as sanguine as you are, Jeff. He says, look, I can see there are cases in which we would allow an irrational cure to slip through, but he says they're very few and far between. He also cites them the Gemara in Pesachim and the Mishnah that Chizkiyahu hid Sefer Harufuot. Why did Chizkiyahu hide the Book of Cures? Because they were not rational. Okay, so there we have it for the time being.
Mhm.
Okay.
One quick question, which may not
Yeah,
have
Brian.
which might not have a quick answer. But,
Exactly, that's the problem.
But the interpretation of eye for an eye has been so widely accepted in the Jewish world for so long.
Yeah.
Why is the Christian world taken an opposite view?
Why has the Christian world, are you sure that the Christianity?
Yeah, they absolutely, it's always quoted in a sense that you should understand it literally.
No.
Okay. Now, what you can do as a Christian, you can say, look how cruel
The Jews are.
The
the
Jews
Jews
are.
are.
Yeah.
They believe in an eye for an eye. In other words, what Christians do is they make polemical hay out of the literal interpretation of the text. Why is Torah and why are Jews bad? Because they're cruel. They believe in an eye for an eye. Okay. Now, then the rabbis, then you come along and say, together with contemporary Jewish theologians, but you have to understand the Torah through rabbinic interpretation. You are stubborn. You won't do that. So you are then just being, as it were, anti-Semitic. Okay, that's the story. But the Rambam is saying that is what the Torah means. Okay, so he would not be. How he never had to deal with Christians. He only had to deal with Muslims, and for them, an eye for an eye, a leg for a leg, an arm for an arm is absolutely, Jean, the way to do things. Okay. You cut off hands, you cut off limbs, you take out eyes all day long, okay? So it's a different polemical context.
Thank you.
All right, so we will do a couple more shiurim and finish off the Rambam, and then Mirza Hashem will be starting the world of the Zohar. And you might think that the Zohar and the Moreh Nevukhim are two extremes. I will show you how we can segue from the Moreh Nevukhim to the Zohar in 3 to 4 weeks' time. So I wish everybody a very good evening, a Shabbat Shalom, a Chodesh Adar Sameach Besorot Tovot,
Amen.
and all the very best. And thank you again for joining me. Bye for now.